Now, which no one can see. I'm just going to click to start. Okay. Could you ask her to come back and how? Yes, I know, but how do I start my screen? Okay, but it's not really. Oh. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to today's EPAC webinar. My name is Robert Cherney. I'm the president of the Ethics Practitioners Association of Canada. Bonjour tout le monde. Nous sommes très heureux de vous avoir avec nous pour ce webinaire avec Robert Marleau que vous voyez maintenant. Non? Okay, well, you know what? The wrong thing's showing. So, okay, so I've turned that off, and I'm going to go back to. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of difficulty getting the screen showing. Oh. Now it's on? Okay, good. So we'll go back. All right, you're still you're still welcome. Well, it's a little bit of a problem. In any case, welcome everyone, and our presenter today is Robert Marleau, who, as you saw from the description, is the Integrity Commissioner for the City of Ottawa and has had very significant posts in public life before then. Before he starts, I just want to remind you of a few items. Please use the phone line or computer audio, whichever you prefer. The voice lines are muted most of the time to reduce interference. However, you can raise your hand to request speaking privilege, or you can send a written message to the question box at any time. And Monsieur Marleau would be happy to have your questions along the way as the presentation continues. The presentation not only will be on our website, in fact, it already is on our website. If you wish to follow it that way, you can download it from the website. Aussi en français, les diapos sont disponibles déjà. Donc, si vous préférez voir la version française, les diapos sont disponibles. Néanmoins, M. Marleau parlera en anglais parce que nous avons beaucoup de gens qui ne parlent pas le français. And I do know the names of the francophones who have registered, and they are very competent in English. So that's how we will continue. So I'm now going to hand it over to Robert Marleau to start the presentation. And as I said, please do raise your hand or send a question at any time. Okay, now I just have to give the control back to you. And oh my, change presenter to Robert Marleau. Okay, there you go. So you do the presentation, and I'm going to unmute myself. Unmute myself. Oops.
You need to change the screen.
We're going to get some assistance. Yeah. Okay, I can see you. I can see you. Okay. Just mute myself completely.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Robert Marleau. I am grateful to see so many of you registered this morning for this EPAC webinar. This is my first experience, so I hope you'll grant me some leeway. I am not as technologically skilled as Robert is. So you can be thankful that the technical part is in his hands. As Robert said, the slides are available on the EPAC website. I will make my presentation mostly in English because I think we had a bit of a challenge in trying to get both screens up for the webinar. But if you have downloaded from the EPAC website, then you can follow along en français. The title of the seminar is Compliance Agreements, Mechanism of Enforcement and Education. And it is based on the experience at the City of Ottawa with the lobby registry, which was launched in September 2012. I should give you a quick background about the accountability framework that exists at the City of Ottawa, introduced in 2012-2013. The first component that was introduced was the lobby registry. It is an online centralized database, very accessible, not highly sophisticated in terms of a search tool, but very searchable by the public and the interested stakeholders. The onus is entirely on the lobbyists to register and comply with the bylaw. There's no pre-registration required as in other jurisdictions, so it's very, I would say, compatible with the political activities of councillors. Lobbying can take place between two consenting adults at a barbecue if they choose to do so. The requirement is that they register within 15 days. Part of the accountability framework also is a code of conduct for councillors, which was introduced in 2013 and has been in place since then. And I, as Integrity Commissioner, am empowered to receive complaints and cause investigations should someone find the behavior or comportment of a councillor objectionable under the terms of the code. The third component of my role in the accountability framework is called the meetings investigator. And in Ontario, under the Municipal Act, all municipal meetings are deemed to be open, and there's fairly limited conditions under which an in-camera meeting can take place. Citizens who feel that their elected public officials at municipal level are not being transparent by abusing the in-camera process can file a complaint with me, and I will cause investigation, have access to all documents, and can order disclosure if an abuse has taken place. So that's the accountability framework, and the lobby registry sits in there as one of the transparency elements to encourage both a open relationship between public officials and lobbyists. The seminal sort of point where lobbying in Ontario at the municipal level came forward was with the Bellamy inquiry in 2007, part of a major Toronto computer leasing scandal, to use the right word, which saw Justice Bellamy file a report with some over 200 recommendations, one of which was the creation of a lobby registry for the City of Toronto. The Municipal Act was then amended to make it possible for other municipalities to develop lobby registries, and the City of Ottawa was only the second one to develop one. It was ordered to be so in Toronto, but the accountability framework introduced in Ottawa was a voluntary political decision with no scandal as a backdrop, and I think that's important to note. A lot of these transparency tools that evolve in various jurisdictions are usually dictated by some kind of inquiry or imposed legislation following some kind of major transgression. City of Ottawa, fortunately, did this as a commitment to accountability and transparency. So that's the background. I'll go very quickly over the lobby registry bylaw. As I said earlier, the onus is on lobbyists to register. The onus is on the public office holder to inform the lobbyists of the bylaw and their obligations if lobbying takes place. And there are three categories of lobbyists under our bylaw. They're the same as in most jurisdictions. There's the paid lobbyist who acts on behalf of the client. There's an in-house lobbyist who may be designated by the employer or the business to be the lobbyist. And then there's a voluntary unpaid lobbyist who, because of background experience, etc., may, on behalf of a business or for-profit organization, be a lobbyist. And then there's the not-for-profit groups where City Council of Ottawa attempted to circumscribe some of the activity of for-profit organizations and define them as those who had paid staff. Hence, if you could afford to pay staff as part of your not-for-profit group, you have a larger obligation to transparency if you are lobbying. The general obligations of the lobbyist is to register within 15 days, business days. So you can extend it to 17 over weekends if you like. Maintain the accurate and compliant profile. Organizations change, staff change, lobbyists. All this is something that they must keep in mind and keep current so that the lobbyist registry is reliable. And there is a code of conduct attached to the bylaw for the lobbyists, and the two principal elements are that they will not put a public office holder in a conflict of interest, nor shall they give any benefit to a public office holder while they have active lobbying files or that their clients have active lobbying files. I think by and large, I would just like to say that I feel that this lobby registry for the City of Ottawa is an example on how to do this without getting caught up into a series of administrative steps and to get caught up in the technology of, how should I say, design software and hardware that can be very expensive. What spooks the most people out there when you talk about setting up these kinds of registries is it's going to cost millions of dollars to design some kind of database that would be searchable every which way, and that the software is going to have to be rewritten because nothing out there actually exists to do this. It's a little more than an Excel spreadsheet, however. The City of Ottawa is very astute, I think, in its approach. It basically said to staff, there shall be a lobby registry. but there's no money to do it with, so be creative. So a basic database based on the Oracle language was repurposed for this, and the interface for the search tool, registration tool by the lobbyist, search tool by the public. The interface is Microsoft Visio off the shelf, and the total cost, I think, at the time, 2012, to bring this from zero to on the adoption date of roughly mid-June to live that September, was about $1 million in investment. So it's to me, it's an example on how you can do some of this transparency, technological-based transparency tools without spending millions and millions of dollars. And I say low on administrative costs because there's no pre-registration. There's no, the only interface with my office is creating a profile of the lobbyist. Once that's approved, it's entirely upon them to, they're obligated to under the bylaw, but it's entirely on them to register in a timely fashion, to define their lobbying file, to post the events, whether they are phone calls, communications, written, or meetings at a barbecue, a wine and cheese, or in the office with the counselor. Now, to get to the part that is of interest to this seminar, I've been giving you the background. A short comment on bylaw and the enforcement provisions related thereto. City Council made an informed choice, a deliberate choice in establishing their sanctions. There was a decision not to look to the enforcement under the prosecution legislation in Ontario available to them, and opted for simply a ban, and delegated that entirely to the lobbyist registrar. Unlike some other jurisdictions who may have to go to court to get a particular sanction imposed, they delegated to the registrar. So on a first breach, which could be non-registration, lack of registration, late registration, etc., I can impose a 1-month communication ban. Second breach, 3 months. Third breach, I make the determination. It's kind of a progressive discipline approach that encourages the lobbyists to comply. But if you're a paid professional lobbyist of some repute, the last thing you want is even a 1-month ban for the registrar to post on the website and advise every public office holder, elected and with delegated authority at City Hall, that you've been banned for a month and no one will communicate with you. So I think that in and of itself is a pretty powerful statement. If you go to the Ottawa City website on the accountability framework page, you can see that there's only been one ban since 2012, and it was an American company selling electronic recording machines for voting. And so in almost 6 years now, there's only been one ban, and as I recall, not even the threat of a second. There's only been one full-fledged investigation in which I found that there had been a breach, but there were mitigating circumstances as to why I didn't impose a ban in those cases. So I think the ban is, the height of blame and shame on a scale of punishment. And I think it stands there as a considerable deterrent, particularly to professionals. Now, we don't know what's under the water for the iceberg in most of these organizations and most jurisdictions, but by and large, for the professional, this is very important. So in the early years, we focused on education. Compliance was not really a priority. for 2012, 2013 was getting the word out. This exists. This is why it exists. I did a lot of seminars. I did a lot of speaking tours locally, local television, community groups, professional organizations, ranging from the real estate world, the infrastructure world. The focus was on promotion. But by 2014-15, we started to notice issues of compliance that had to be addressed. We did a mini audit, and things like late registrations were one issue. Another was lack of information. And if you are lobbying and your only description of it is rezoning, that's rather bare as a statement of what you're trying to attempt and influence decisions of council. So we did a lot of that. So there was a lot of reminding and going forward with reprofiling some of the descriptions, a little bit more educations, more outreach. But by the beginning of last year, we started looking at now some enforcement. And when we look at enforcement, a lot of the issues that we uncovered or that came to my attention, by way of background, I don't need a formal complaint in order to act under the bylaw. If something comes to my attention, I can just simply take it up. A lot of the issues were minor and inadvertent breaches, slightly late registration, but most of them fell into the category of offering gifts or benefits to public office holders while having active lobbying files. Some of these range from minor gifts like candy baskets to tickets to various activities. And most of them that came to my attention, while they could not be ignored because there was a body of knowledge out there that knew about this particular gesture, say of offering a benefit to a councillor, at the same time, they were mitigating circumstances as to when they were being offered. Did they know the bylaw existed? Were they informed by the public office holder that the bylaw was there and what their duties were? They registered their profile, but they never read the lobbyist code of conduct. There's a difference between offering a gift of, say, 2 tickets to the Ottawa 67s or a free trip to Taipei. And so in that kind of range of things, I was looking for something else that would both serve an education role and encourage compliance. And yes.
There's a question.
Oh, yes. By the way, anytime you wish to interrupt me or ask a question, either by raising your technological hand, I'd be happy to answer them, and I'll ask Robert to keep an eye on that for me. So the question has come: how has the compliance structure been received by lobbyists and city council, given that you've had some experience with imposing compliance? There must be some reactions to it. The answer to that question is, on council side, they fully had expected there would be bans, and probably more bans than there are now. On the lobbyist side, I should say, at first it was more surprised by many of the lobbyists. I'm talking mostly about the lobbyists who are truly in the municipal world versus those who have active files at all levels, federal, provincial, and municipal. For those lobbyists in the federal, provincial range who happened to come to City Hall, there was no surprise. But in municipal world, those were in planning, development, infrastructure support, those kinds of things, IT to municipal world, there was a bit of consternation. Councillors' reaction when I posted some of the compliance agreements that I'm going to talk about were very positive. Sometimes a little flippant and saying, "Oh, I see you published another compliance agreement this week," kind of comment, to absolutely no feedback from some of the councillors. So no feedback I take as positive from the councillors, and the feedback I'm getting from lobbyists is they are taking note, those who are not subject to the compliance agreement. Let me talk about the compliance agreement per se. I found inspiration in this in the Elections Commissioners Act. I was aware of it also being in the Privacy Act, having been a former interim privacy commissioner, and none of it, Integrity Commissioners Act, has specific references to compliance agreements. In the electoral expenses context, it's more an option to judicial review or judicial prosecution, and therefore it has a little bit more of a authority, I think, in terms of an option for that commissioner. In my case, it's full administrative invention. There's no mention of it in the bylaw. I have just taken the bylaw authority that says I shall ensure compliance to mean that I can use certain of these tools administratively to do so. And so the compliance agreement is totally voluntary. It's an agreement between the Integrity Commissioner and the lobbyist, but I felt it needed to be a public and transparent acknowledgement of transgression, because there is some public knowledge that if someone sends a gift, 24 counselors, they all show up at the door with a nice little thank you card on it. A lot of people have seen that come to City Hall, and obviously a compliance agreement between myself and the offending lobbyist and filed in my office quietly wouldn't have the same impact, nor would it satisfy the interest of those who observe the transgression. So all compliance agreements are posted on the Ottawa website, and I send notice to all city councillors and delegated authority office holders at City Hall that I have posted such an agreement. The lobbyist can continue lobbying. It is not banned from pursuing their files, but they now have made a public statement of compliance. And so what does it include, this compliance agreement? Well, it's an agreement statement of facts. They acknowledge the transgression without necessarily admitting guilt. Little room in there for an explanation, an action on their part, an apology to the counselor, but really an acknowledgement of their responsibilities and obligations, terms and conditions with myself going forward, and a commitment on my part in return for agreeing to sign this and post it is that I will not cause a formal investigation and no sanction, no specific sanction and such transgression. And the advantage there, I think, for both the taxpayer and the offending lobbyist is that an investigation can be quite expensive depending on the issues. I think this is usually solved within an hour in my office with a one-on-one meeting with the lobbyist, which stands as a bit of an education session as well. And the matter is resolved, posted, and compliance commitment is made. So there are economies of scale that we can refer to, but I think there are efficiencies in getting at the issue, getting it resolved, getting it posted for transparency purposes, and moving on. And so I found it a fairly effective tool. So there's, as I said, in the it's a statement of facts. This is just kind of an anonymized version of it, and a couple of pages there. The statement, first page is the acknowledgement, the explanation, an actual statement that I am now aware of the relevant provisions of the bylaw and the code, and a written commitment that they undertake to comply. The second page is our common agreement that having complied and cooperated in this matter, that I commit to closing this file. There will be no investigation, no sanction, and the consent for publication. If there is no consent for publication, there is no compliance agreement. That's the basic line. And although I've had a little bit of pushback on that, the option for myself or for the offending party is a full-fledged investigation. Some might see that as a bit of a blackmail, that sign this or else, but that's not the tone of the conversation. The issue is trying to get people to acknowledge that, oh, this is important. This is a bylaw, and there is a comportment that is expected both by the public office holder and the lobbyist in being transparent about their activities and in being ethically responsible in their exchange, and therefore it's very difficult not to commit to that if you're an individual. And I'll say, no, I don't believe in this. Well, then maybe you shouldn't be a lobbyist. So rather than put the emphasis on sign this or there'll be an investigation, the onus is really on agreeing rather than trying to argue the merits of not signing compliance agreement. So by posting these, the other lobbyists see it as well. And I was criticized at one time for sending a letter of direction to a university president who had sent free tickets for a particular university team to counselors. It hit the newspaper. They said, "Oh, wow, that's cheap $10 tickets." I mean, come on, get a life. But you know what? Every other lobbyist paid attention to it. The journalist of the day thought I was being excessive, but there are no exceptions. If the university was lobbying, it was lobbying, and that's the end of it. And at that time, I had not yet put in the compliance agreement, and all those small transgressions led me to that. And I think it's a very effective tool. It was noticed by someone who practices in the field, Guy Giorno. Some of you may know him. He's now, I think, a lobby registrar for some of the municipalities in Ontario as well. And when I issued one in December of 2016, I guess he had planned a poem that he sends out annually, and he excerpted. He did put a reference to one of those compliance agreements. Kind of cute, actually. A little bit on this approach of what's the poem, The Nights Before Christmas. It happened in December. So basket of foods, exotic and yummy, makes wonderful gift for grandma and mommy, not when sent to councillors of the city, but by a lobbyist listed on the registry. So the experience to date, we have 4 published on the website. It's my intention for now to leave them there indefinitely. They are posted indefinitely on the Privacy Commissioner's website. They're posted indefinitely on the Elections Commissioner's website. They may become stale at one point by virtue of a company disappearing, a lobbyist, disappearing in whatever form that might take. I might revisit that in the future, but for the time being, they are published and left on the website. Since then, however, I have found a bit of not so much a loophole, but a lack in the bylaw, where while it states I have authority over the lobbyists, I really have no authority over their clients. Now, the lobbyist code of conduct says that a lobbyist shall not provide a benefit while they have active files or their clients have active files. My jurisdiction does not extend to the companies they represent directly, and sometimes a company will, or a group will, offer some kind of benefit to a councillor while they've had active files without the knowledge of the lobbyist. I put the onus on the lobbyist to inform their client when those transgressions do occur and come to my attention. But I'm now working on another tool, which I'm going to call letters of direction, which will allow me to reach out to those clients who may be not compliant, and basically outline for them the terms of the bylaw. It's more than just an education. I make it a direction. I don't have authority to enforce that direction, but most reputable companies, firms, will stand to attention when they receive such a letter and will wish to comply because their brand may be at stake. And I will inform the lobbyist by copy of the letter of direction. We've only issued one so far, and I want to use them where, again, they are minor transgressions. In the first case, it was self-disclosure. Oh my God, we had meetings in July. It's now October. We haven't disclosed. What can we do, Commissioner? Of course, right away we get them to comply, but I follow it up with, here's the bylaw, here are the terms, here's what you're expected to do, here's what your lobbyist has to do. I can't threaten them with any sanction of any kind, but as I say, most companies who have a brand to protect will comply. And here I'm going to mention that particular company that I've had some exchange with because it's a very positive one. It has nothing to do with a compliance agreement or a letter of direction. They've sought my advice. It was Rogers Communications, and I'm not advertising for Rogers Communications here. But when I met with their lobbyists, they shared with me how they manage their lobbying activity within the organization. And I have to say that in my experience, it's one of the best administrative, both control and information system within an organization on why lobbying has to be transparent, why Rogers has to respect federal, provincial, municipal jurisdictions in their activities, and the way in which they communicate from one lobbyist to the next, from one level to the next, is quite remarkable. I use them as an example. They seek advice in advance of doing anything, and they wish to comply, not just because there are contravention consequences to the law, but you sense when you read their documents that there is a commitment to transparency. Of course, ultimately, their brand is important. And so these letters of direction now are being developed to send out to those companies who may have a communications problem internally. The right-hand lobbyist doesn't know what the left-hand lobbyist is doing. We've seen those cases at the city. Since each registration is independent, each lobbyist is independent, they may not have told a colleague within the same organization that they're lobbying for the city, and all of a sudden, I don't know, flowers show up at the door of the mayor, and a contravention has taken place. So I'm hoping that these letters of direction will allow me, without going back to council, to open up the bylaw for amendment, will allow me administrative reach into those corporations to ensure compliance. And really, I think going forward, and the next sort of 4 or 5 years, focus at the City of Ottawa would be more on compliance, less on education, although education is a continuing effort. But what I am finding now is by exercising a gentle form of compliance, I am also satisfying the education requirement. And I'll take your questions.
Okay. Can you read this?
Yes, I can. Start with the top.
Yeah.
Or all 3 questions from Mr. Shepherd. Good morning, Robert. I'm flattered that you joined us for this. First question from Robert Shepherd. One can also anticipate that as there are more of these compliance agreements in place, the effort on the part of the Commissioner's office to monitor them will increase. Well, the answer to that question will be they become reference points for those lobbyists, for sure. And In terms of active monitoring after a compliance agreement has been signed, I've taken no particular initiative. I am banking on that if there is a transgression of the compliance agreement, that it will become fairly quickly obvious. In other words, if it's a question of offering a gift, the word gets back to my office pretty quickly about gifts these days, and I would assume that the next step, if the compliance agreement was violated, would be not much of an option but to invoke the ban. So I have not developed any particular measures to monitor the compliance agreements. They're kind of standalone offenses, if I can put it that way. They may over time develop within the body of compliance agreements certain trends that I need to monitor or look at. But so far, for posted compliance agreements, in my view, compliance agreements do not yet form a trend. The next question. Funny that.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Have you had instance where a lobbyist refused to sign a compliance agreement? So far, no. Have I had resistance? Yes. One compliance agreement took about 20 seconds to sign. The lobbyist just wanted to get this done, get it over with, move on. Another took a good hour of education and discussion as to the merits thereof, without again putting the emphasis on the negative side of investigations, but ultimately only one individual took it home to consider it, I think to seek legal advice, and then came back and signed it. What action, next question from, I'm sorry, that last question was from Michel Renaud. Deuxième question de Michel. What action do you take as a result? Well, as a result of an agreement's being signed, I post it on the accountability website, and I follow that up with a communication to all city councillors and the public office holders within the administration that have delegated authority, that with no commentary other than saying a compliance agreement with my office has been signed and is now posted on the website for people to consider. Inevitably, someone will advise the media, and I will get questions from the media. But my exchange with the media is read the compliance agreement. It speaks for itself. I treat the conversation between myself and the lobbyists as confidential, and that's my commitment to them as well.
There's another one here.
From
also from Mr. It would be useful to know. Start from there.
It would be useful to know. I don't see it.
Okay, right here. Whoops. Well,
Okay.
sorry, we're having it.
Okay. Again, I think from Robert Shepherd. It would be useful to know how the commissioner monitors whether in fact the agreement has been followed. No point having an agreement if there's no follow through. Well, so far, the 4 agreements, compliance agreements, have been about offering gifts or benefits. And the follow through on that is fairly simple. If the lobbyist offers more gifts or subsequent gifts following that, then I would have to act. But it's not difficult to monitor. I get questions about accepting gifts from councillors all the time, and having advised councillors that a gift was offered, either to return it or they didn't accept it but informed me of it. The other assurance is that it's also a violation of the code of conduct of councillors to accept gifts from lobbyists. So there's 2 codes. that are in sync. And I find that that is a pretty good, how should I say, safety valve in terms of making sure that I'm informed. Furthermore, counselors also have to disclose on a quarterly basis all gifts that they accept, gifts, benefits, or hospitality that exceed $100 or tickets that exceed $30. Some are after asking me in advance that they can't accept them. And of course, the first reference is this a lobbyist? Do they have an active file? And therefore the answer is no, counselor. And if it's yes, you can accept this gift within the context of the code of conduct, and it gets disclosed. So those are the kind of the reference points that for the compliance agreements for offering gifts in violation of lobbyist code don't need much follow-up. As we get into more and more the compliance of their timely registration, then yes, I would say that in those circumstances, the letter of direction that I've sent recently is in that category. It will require more follow-up. Our tool, as I said, is a little technologically, I don't want to say simple, but it does have its limitations in the kind of searches or search tools that I would like to have to find out proactively on my side who's late, how late, and the description now of lobbying activity has to be monitored manually. So we're looking at developing those tools so I can do better monitoring of that. And of course, if there was a prior compliance agreement, it would be easier to do, but so far, that's where we stand.
Here's a longer one.
Here's the question. You might want to explain where compliance agreements fit within the hierarchy of agreements. You are filling an important gap in the middle of the hierarchy between awareness and essentially big sticks for prosecution. This places a great deal of responsibility on you to get these agreements and their enforcement right. There has to be trust between you and the council that you have good judgment. Well, I figured they had good judgment when they passed the motion to hire me. That was their first exercise in good judgment. Yes, some degree. I don't want to make light of the question. The gap that I was trying to fill, as you say, in the hierarchy of penalties, was one that would encourage proactive compliance. It's okay to have a bylaw that imposes a fine, just like parking, and say, okay, it's $1,000 for a transgression, and people go before the justice of the peace and plead their case or pay their fine. But I find that's not a proactive desire of complying, expression of compliance. Sure, you'll be before the judge, say, well, judge, I won't park illegally again. If you'll reduce my fine. Judge agrees, and I suppose you have to show up again and you've got another parking ticket, the judge will take a different point of view. This is a public agreement by a firm, a lobbyist, that they will comply, that they are aware of the elements of compliance. And while prosecution is an option in many jurisdictions, I won't name any, I would bet my bottom dollar that it costs the taxpayer a whole lot more to prosecute than the actual fine that was paid by the lobbyist. I know of one case where over $25,000 in one jurisdiction was spent in legal fees to get a successful prosecution for a $1,000 fine. That doesn't make sense. And if you're a big lobbying firm out there, it just might be worth the price to pay the $1,000 fine to get the big contract, to get profile, to get the exposure. So the damage that is done to a brand by a ban, I think, is obvious. The damage done by a compliance agreement and that hierarchy is lesser because there is an expression of compliance. There's an expression of, to some degree, maybe ignorance in the process, but now I'm informed, I'm educated. Yes, I believe in this transparency tool, and we will respect it. So The judgment that council has sort of delegated to me is enforcement. And I've chosen to go one step below the actual ban which is authorized. Oh, another question. Please comment on using compliance agreements within organizations. For instance, sorry. Please comment on using compliance agreements within organizations. For instance, should an errant employee be asked to sign such an agreement, absent future behavior and change strategies? Should this be entirely private, or should there be an element of name and shame? The concept of compliance agreements can be used, I think, in all kinds of situations. You can have I've had compliance agreements with my teenagers. We used to have the rules of the free room and board posted on the front of the fridge. And if you violated those rules, we had a form of compliance agreement. And sanctions was like, you're not going to get the car on Friday night. I mean, compliance agreements, I think, are a very natural part of human behavior and exchange. So yes, I think they can be used within organizations. More and more organizations have codes of conduct within their ethical framework, and certainly employee could be transgressing one of these. It's not a firing offense. It can be an agreement between manager and an employee. It can be form part of to some degree, performance agreements now, which are, quite used in most organizations, are a form of compliance agreement, if you like. They're not so much about compliance as they are expected targets to be raised, but they are behavioral based. You will work hard and do your job. So they can be used in various formats. To protect privacy, however, in certain organizations, you would not want to think about where you publish these and how you publish these. But there are organizations, and the House of Commons where I used to work was one where we would have our strategy meetings, and on the agenda, well, this was not written and published, on the agenda was an item for every meeting, which was called Confessions and Rumors. And the managers around the table would be encouraged, if they had a confession to make, this was the proper place to do it. So it's a question of, and of course, usually there was some form of a transgression of a rule, of a management practice, of a policy, or a non-performance issue that was being admitted to. It was without particular threat or consequence, but it was encouraged to have that kind of discourse. It's a form of oral compliance agreement. I now know this policy exists. We didn't quite meet what we should have done under the policy. We're sorry it damaged the organization a little bit, but we made sure that things are redressed so that it doesn't happen again. So yeah, I think that they can be used in all kinds of organizations. McDonald's Employee of the Month is a kind of a compliance agreement structure, if I could put it that way. You recognize someone for performance, but the basic values of the organization underlie that recognition. And so everybody commits to it. Some people are rewarded publicly for doing so. It just gets a little more difficult to acknowledge publicly the transgressions.
Okay. Are there any other questions? You can. Yeah. Well, Jim, you'll ask it. We're going to ask if there's any other questions.
Okay. No. I'm sorry. I still have the microphone. Robert has asked me to say any other questions or aspects of the lobby registry of the City of Ottawa you would like me to address.
Okay, and I switched to here.
Just you have to go down here and turn your audio back.
Yeah. Lordy.
All right, it's Robert Cherney here. Oops. Yep, there we go. All right, too many things to click here simultaneously. So I'd like to just invite you to, whoopsies, gotten rid of all of that. If you could use your question box, please, to rate the webinar, tell us how you feel about it, how we can improve the EPAC webinars. I'm quite aware about the skills of the facilitator or coordinator that need to be improved. And especially tell us about topics that you'd like to cover in the future. And you can send us comments also later via our email address. And go to the website where the slides already are there, and we'll have the audio recording of this webinar. So thank you very much to Robert Marlot and to his assistant who's here today, also helping and pointing at different parts of my screen that I was supposed to be paying attention to. And thank you very much. And we do invite you to consider becoming a member of EPAC and participating with us in our activities. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.